It's just another like casual stream, honestly. We're just hanging out, kind of like last time. Nothing too serious.
That's
We'll
right.
talk about anything. We're having fun. We're going to do it, as we usually do. I saw some people say, like, when it comes to Japan, like, there was some article that was run. I have no idea where it was from or what institution ran it, but they were saying, like, everything that's authentically Japanese really originated in China first. And people were commentating saying, oh, Japan's at this stage of like the first world kind of Western experience where all of a sudden you're advanced enough, you've imitated the West, so you don't really have your own culture anymore. None of it was actually real. It was all imported or foreign, and there was never anything authentic about it in the first place. And I don't know if that was really the angle that the article was going for, but it's definitely true that there's enormous Chinese influence in Japan historically. Like that's definitely a reality. It's just, again, it's one of those things we've talked about when discussing the history in the first place. How do we take these data points, the various events, and sort of narrativize them, interpret them, and so on? In one case, people are saying, oh, this is denying Japan's authentic culture, but that's only if you kind of connect it to this broader narrative, and it's not necessarily something inherent in the data itself. And that's a different question, you know?
Yeah, I think the way that a lot of these decorists, we see that, yeah, I mean, I'm Japanese and I'm definitely on my Chinese path. My dad is not stoked. But anyways,
His dad's not happy about that.
My dad is not stoked. But I think like with all of these posts, like the article you read, it's kind of like an own to like Japanese people where like I feel like personally I already feel down because China is just killing it, but also like they say them as like an own, like actually like as a red pilled own, and it's like bro, we've known this.
Exactly.
Like,
that's what I mean. Like, it's that narrative that they're constructing. It's like, oh, this denies anything authentic, real, or, oh, you like Japan? Well, you can't now because it's not really Japan. Everything is Chinese anyways. And it's like, yeah, but no, like you don't have to take it that way. And that's not a natural consequence of the fact that Japan has had cultural influence from China. You know what I mean? Even when you have cultural influence from a foreign power, even if you've borrowed the alphabet system, the religion, everything of this sort, you always see the unique like cultural twist. There's a new sort of matrix that same phenomenon is being subjected to that does make it unique and make it real in its own context, to the point where even something like Buddhism, for instance, you take that example, like Buddhism came through China into Japan. Of course, it came from India originally, so there's an even further back step in that cultural transfer. But regardless, like Japanese Buddhism does become its own distinct reality, fused with the Shinto kind of indigenous belief system, and that's the exact sort of cultural matrix I'm describing. It's still real, it's authentic, and because it's really describable, it's measurable. You can really understand how different it is from the Chinese origin that it came from. You know?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Like my dad's Buddhist, and like all of his like shrines and shit. Like you get like I'm just like going off a reference of the visual of those, but it's like you get that like Japanese Shinto vibe, but then you got like the twist of like maybe there's like a lotus flower on there or something, and like, you know.
But it's super interesting. Like you see that fusion. So to say that, oh, because some element of this originated somewhere else, it's not authentically Japanese anymore. It's not authentically this thing. I don't even know what that means, dude. Like, what are we talking about? Is it not real?
Right.
Is Zen Buddhism with its own particular set of Japanese masters, its own text, its own sort of elaboration of the original Chan Buddhism, does that not real because it came from China first? And was Chan Buddhism not real because it came from India first? Like you just, how far back do you go before anything's real in its own way?
That's right. Decruz is saying like Korean fried chicken.
Yeah.
And that just reminds me, of just like the early like Toyota, like Nissan cars from like the like the 60s and 70s probably. I might be wrong, like 80s. But yeah, they're like, could you argue that they're their own Japanese thing, even though it's like clearly they're just like Japanese personified like small ripoffs of like what we had here in the States.
For sure. But it's still like, even when they're imitating the technology, it's not like they immediately import the culture or the entire phenomenon. And technology is one thing because materially there is just a way to do things. Like there's a single way, and maybe with internal improvements or what have you, but there is a way to just make an internal combustion engine. Like it's going to be that. If you're going to have that in any capacity, you're necessarily going to have to imitate the examples that came before. So they borrowed the technology from the West. They learned how to make it in some way, but they always kind of improve it. And if it's not a measurable improvement, it's at least a variation and a difference. And it's integrated into a totally different cultural network every time. It's actually one of the fascinating things about Japan's trajectory during industrialization. They were the first non-Western country to industrialize, as you know, and they basically adopted the technological and economic schema of the West and fused it over time. They tried to borrow some of the cultural imports as well, realized it didn't work so well in their society, and essentially reverted to a cultural system that was very familiar to them and felt aligned with their traditional values in history, while still integrating and utilizing the Western technology. That's what made them so distinct and actually part of what intimidated the West in some sense through the late 19th and early 20th century when they started to really make gains in the Pacific and whatnot. It's like, oh, this is a different type of state with a different cultural matrix, you could say, utilizing the technology effectively in the same exact way. And a lot of the thinking through the 19th century was, of course, you needed the cultural setting first in order for the technology to really emerge. And it only emerged in the West because of the superior cultural arrangement that the West had. It's like, no, well, once it's invented, you actually know how to mechanically use these things. You can integrate them into any cultural matrix, really. Right. Or at least it's theoretically possible. And that's different. So it's its own thing, to answer your question every time.
Bokor says, thoughts on the Persians.
Persians are awesome, dude. I love Persian civilization. I mean, talented, brilliant people, a lot of huge cultural impact. I really appreciate their contributions to Islamic history, you could say. Some brilliant philosophers, mystics, just theologians. Persians are awesome. Even in the modern times, I find it to be impressive that Iran has any sort of power and technological and economic prowess whatsoever, because they're basically subjected to a full embargo by the Western world on the behalf of the United States to sort of survive those pressures and not fully collapse on yourself. That's not too good. Trying to see the comments on the TV with the lights. I can't really read them that well.
Persia was so cool. Then the second Steppe people came in, they just dominated.
Right. The Steppe people definitely dominated militarily. What's interesting about the Persians to me in that context is the fact that they were dominated politically and militarily, but still exerted an enormous cultural influence on those very same steppe peoples that came in. And in fact, a lot of the time, once those steppe peoples settled down and tried to sort of rule over the territories that they had effectively conquered, they utilized just pure Persian bureaucrats to administer the government, more or less, or at least teach other, of these other members of the steppe tribes to administer in a Persian style in accordance to Persian law and tradition. So it's what makes Persia very resilient in that sense. They've been conquered politically time and time again by these nomads, like we talked about in the nomad episode, but they still survived intact as a cultural unit, entirely cohesively, that exerted a lot of influence on the very people who conquered them. And that's interesting. It's very unique in that sense.
That's kind of based.
Yeah.
I don't want to say anything or go into too much race shit, but it's all pretty cohesive over there, while they were getting dominated, or was there a lot of mixing with those who dominated?
There was mixing for sure, but it just depends on the region as well.
How do you think they kept the culture?
It's hard to say for sure, but a lot of it is kind of that tension with, or the dynamic between the steppe nomads and the settled peoples, like we've talked about before too. So
They were just open to it.
They're open to it. They had administered their regions since time immemorial, you could say. And they already had a formalized, established system of government, of laws, of a sort of central control that was adopted by the people who conquered them successfully, whether it was the Arabs originally in the original Islamic conquest of Persia, or the later Turkic steppe nomads, the Mongolians, more Turks after that, more Central Asians, whatever it might be. Eventually, when those groups make a transition to settled government and trying to actually administer the territory, they rely on the established Persian methods to do so. And they usually adopt the written Persian language that had already existed as an administrative language that goes in connection with the system. These tribes didn't have written languages themselves, of course. So they all of a sudden utilize the language. With that comes a whole package of sort of cultural traditions associated with the language, the literature, the poetry, the mystical writings, everything of that sort. And then that just becomes part of the fabric of rulership for these Turkic groups. They're speaking Persian, they're composing Persian poetry when they're trying to portray themselves as like a legitimate ruler. They're basically transitioning from nomad into a Persian emperor of some sort. And what that looks like on the total level was they're mixing between these tribes and groups and the actual like Persian people, for sure. It just depends on the region to what extent. But I think all through, I can't read it perfectly, but I think he was saying that like Persia has more cultural influence from the steppe than even Turkey, which is true for sure. There's a lot. The last like ruling dynasties of Persia, like significantly before real European dominance and influence, like the Qajar dynasty in the 1800s, they were Turkic in origin, primarily. So you just see that happen quite a bit. In fact, you could say it's this kind of idea of an independent, like Iran ruled by Persians, is a pretty recent modern phenomenon that haven't had their independent systems in almost over 1,000 years, really. It's pretty bad, but interesting. It's awesome stuff. Oh, like in the basket of it, like the full Silk Road? Like what aspect of it in particular?
Like if you're just traveling.
I mean, it's a difficult journey no matter what, because if you're coming from the Middle East, let's say, and you're moving across, you're going through Central Asia, which is just littered with these steppe nomad groups. And the thing is, depending on the political situation in all of the areas you're traveling, if those kingdoms are stable in some sense, then they usually have a good relationship or at least some sort of agreement with the nomads on the route, and you're able to travel safely. If you're in a period of nomadic invasion or political dissolution, then things might get a little shaky and trade could be disrupted. If you didn't bring enough tribute with you when you're like assailed on the roads in the middle of nowhere and some random tribe comes up and is essentially demanding it, that could be a problem. Very easy for you to get enslaved and captured and whatnot. But ultimately, through a lot of the history, just because it's a general question, approaching it as a generality, the routes were pretty well established. And if you knew what you were doing, you would not veer from them in any way whatsoever. You weren't doing any exploring. There's nothing to explore. It's an endless steppe frontier that you had no business even trying to enter in any serious way. And if you deviated, eventually you're going through the deserts, like the Gobi Desert and whatnot. There used to be a few like oasis cities around there that were part of this other cultural group called the Tocharians, which are now extinct. You knew where those cities were, you were going to go there. You weren't going to deviate off the path or try and find something different. It was pretty static in that sense. And because it was static, it could be disrupted very easily. And when it was disrupted...
Were the oasis like cities like you just like go there to like refuel?
Even just to stop or lodge for the night or buy provisions, anything of that sort. It'd be impossible. I mean, it depends on how big your caravan was or anything like that, but it'd be impossible just to, pack for the whole trip here or there. It'd be really difficult at least, especially with perishable food goods or whatever you have. Different weather, biomes, more or less. It'd be rough.
What were the name of those people?
Tocharians, Tocharians. What's interesting, they spoke an Indo-European language of some sort, discovered from their archaeological remnants from their cities, their script, and it's related Indo-European language. They practiced Buddhism. That was the kind of what the script was. It was different Buddhist scriptures, but there was two different variants of the language. One that was kind of a spoken dialect, they think, and one was a older version of the language that was remain static or unchanged in order to sort of preserve the Buddhist scripture, how it came to them. So interesting group of people for sure.
And they were like steppe people, so they were like kind of like a mix of like
They would have been like a long time ago, but they were settled in like the basically where kind of like where the Uyghurs are right now in that province of China.
so they look like
Northwest.
Asian.
They were kind of a mix, according to the reports, if they were Indo-European too. There's some accounts, like from Chinese depictions, where they look like the Chinese would depict them as true, like Western foreigners with beards, sometimes blonde or red hair too. So, but they were exactly one of these steppe types, which are probably a mix of, Indo-European derived peoples in some sense, and the different like Mongolic or Turkic types on the steppe. So, yeah. It's like just like how the Kyrgyz were described in the Chinese sources in the 9th century as red-haired and blonde-haired, and they certainly don't look like that today, despite there not being any real cultural disruption or anything like that. It's just the normal mixing on the steppe that you'd see for sure. But yeah, on the Silk Road, like it would be. I can't read these comments. I see it moving, but
The steppe just had the most aura.
yeah, they did. There was a lot of aura on the steppe, dude. It's one of my personal like fantasies almost. Like everybody's like, go back in time. Where would you be? Like being a true nomad. You're not really developing civilization, but you're having fun. You're on your horse. You got the bow. Your throat's singing. You got the falcon. You're just destroying and razing everything in your path. Everybody fears you. You can make skull pyramids. That's aura for sure.
Wait, what's the skull pyramids?
They would do that sometimes. Like I think Al-Athri mentioned the Timurids. Timur's army himself, Tamerlane in the west, they made skull pyramids from cities that they razed, just collected the skulls, stacked them up. Part of the psychological warfare, just
How
butchering
big
people.
were they reported to be?
Pretty big. I don't know the exact size, but noticeable. It wasn't like a little pile, you know what I mean?
Yeah, because I
Like,
imagine it's just like
yeah, it's pretty horrifying.
okay.
Yeah, the Terran mummies had blonde or red hair. Yeah, that's true. From Kipchak's to Hunch Timurids, you can't hear it. Yeah, no, it's true. The steppe has a ton of aura, dude. I love it. That's kind of what I want to do. It's fascinating to study because they are everything you hear about them in the written sources. It either comes from their descendants later after they've settled down, or their enemies when they were nomads, of course. So they're always described like from the outside, you could say, because they didn't have a written language typically. They had oral traditions and everything else, but this didn't always get fully preserved in the transition to settle life.
That's so sick.
Yeah, it was interesting people for sure. Huge impact on world history, like underrated, as we've talked about in the episode.
Yeah.
And Al-Athri says, imagine if the steppe actually cared about bureaucracy and state building. Yeah, they'd be pretty unstoppable in a certain sense for their time. But it makes me wonder, could they have even been as effective, or would they have been truly as feared or fearsome if they cared about bureaucracy or state building? Or is it because they channeled all their whole conception of civilization, their conception of rulership was connected to martial prowess and dominance? And this like kind of idea of almost cultivating the civilization over time, building it up, tending to it, caring for it like it's a crop or a flower that you're growing over a seasonal period. That's already like so far removed from their mentality. They would never think like that in the first place.
So Saint Bocephus says the Mongols were great at bureaucracy.
Yeah, you can make that argument once they settled down and started adopting into their administrations the various bureaucrats from the civilizations they had conquered, whether it was the Chinese and the Chinese portion of the Mongol Empire, or the Persian bureaucrats we were mentioning, the Ilkhanate. They had assimilated those practices and were pretty effective at managing the empire for a time. There's no doubt. But I think what Al-Athri means, too, is the sort of initial tendency of these peoples. If that's something that they were oriented towards, like once we conquer the civilization, we're going to build it up and make it something better, but it was just never their mentality in the first place. their rulership, their conception of rule was related to that martial prowess, that establishment of order through force and dominance, truly. Their sense of an economy was not one based on progressively larger agricultural yields that build. It was based on tribute and submission. So if you're strong, you take the tribute. You take from those who grow and who build and cultivate, and they owe it to you because you can dominate them. It's not your business or your prerogative to cultivate and grow and build in the same capacity. Why would you do that? Just to be dominated? Totally different cultural framing or frame of mind in the first place.
Thanks for the follow, Sane Bosphus.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
And Wrestlin, I didn't shout you out. Thank you so much, guys. Check out the bio for more. And also,
what did Al-Athri say, by the way? You think you can argue that Persia has a better Turkic historical claim than Turkey, unironically? Yeah, I think you can, actually. I would actually make the claim with the Ottoman Empire, especially as it develops, it has a more Mediterranean cultural complex overall than a specifically Turkish one. They kind of assimilated into that broader cultural sphere, and even as they were in that cultural sphere, Persian still had a greater prestige than any sort of Turkic language. They were doing the same thing that the Turkic nomads in Persia were doing, and sort of adopting the Persianate framework in order to rule their empire. But they're then influenced by the old Byzantine system that they had sort of inherited. They're influenced by their explicit competition with the West and just being a Mediterranean empire. So the specific Turkic influence, I think, is diminished even through the Ottoman Empire, interestingly enough. And it's just because of the proximity of Persia to the steppe and how much human flow there was from the steppe into Persia. Yeah, the cultural influence is probably stronger than it was in the Ottoman Empire, particularly. Yeah, Greek world and Rome influenced it too. Absolutely did. That was a huge contribution to even the Ottoman conception. There's always those debates. You see it all the time. Is the Ottoman Empire the Roman Empire? Is it a continuation? It's like, no, it couldn't be because they're Turkish Muslims or something like that. But dude, it's like they kind of are in a certain sense. Like, they did inherit a lot of that framework, adopted Byzantine laws. Like, if anybody's going to seriously claim that Russia is the third Rome or something like that, then the Ottomans are definitely a closer and better case to make for being Roman in some sense. And yeah, it's part of the fact that they just inherited so much influence from Rome itself. Definitely.
Sursum says, are you guys autistic enough to know if there's a specific translation of the Rig Veda I should get?
Unfortunately, I'm not autistic enough for that. I wish I could help you there. I'm trying to remember which one I read, but it's been a while now. I'd have to go look on my bookshelf or something. Maybe we could post about it and let you know. And I don't even know if it's the best one. There might be even a better one, to be honest. But yeah, I don't know. I apologize, Sursum. The Hinduism is not my primary area of focus. I know a bit about it, I would say, but it's unfortunately not a total area of expertise. I appreciate it. No worries.
We're talking about a lot in the Discord that reminds me about the Odyssey translation.
Yeah, dude. I mean, see, what about the Odyssey translations, specifically, do you want to talk about, or what's going on? Maybe we could ask some of the people here.
Yeah. So who's Emily, what's her name? Wilson,
yeah.
Emily Wilson's translation.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I would finish it by reading that one.
Yeah.
That's what I said in the Discord. I wish I would have read the others, but
people were mentioning in the Discord, apparently there's a whole controversy over it because her translation of the Odyssey, it just appears really simple and kind of mundane. And people say this diminishes the almost poetic value of the Odyssey itself. It's this isn't how it's really read. And you could finish it because it's really simple and probably easy to understand. But it was kind of what I was asking too. We know the translators are going to take certain liberties in rendering the Greek into English. And obviously, when you do that, you're going to lose some of the poetic content. There's no doubt. But how much liberty should the translator have to sort of add flourish to the text and try and enliven it? And how can you really determine if their flourish is actually grounded in the language itself and not just a total extrapolation from the meaning? That's the kind of line you have to walk as a translator. And if you're just going to decide, no flourish whatsoever, we're almost going to render it in the most simple, basic terms and not preserve any of that poetic sense generally, then Yeah, it's like readable, but it does feel like you're losing something. And I think that's what a lot of people are reacting to. Of course, they make it like a whole like gender politics thing too, but it's that's one element of it.
Yeah, well, there's that. But I think I was talking to a friend about, or you met, yeah. I was talking to a friend about just like the degradation of like just English. Like I feel like I hear anyone else say anything in another language, I'm like, that's the most beautiful sentence I've ever heard. But in English, I feel like it's so like, I don't. What do you think about like the idea of it being just like so widespread and it's just like this is very just utilitarian like that?
It is utilitarian, and that's how we use it. But it's all. I mean, our use of the English language has been degraded. It's noticeable. It's absolute, and I don't. This doesn't necessarily need to be a political point per se, and some people make of that of it. But if you just read Pride and Prejudice, for instance, by Jane Austen, give a female author just to keep on the gender politics topic, but it's some of the most beautiful English prose ever written in a novel, in a story like that. It's refined, it's cultivated, it's exceptional, and every sentence has a rhythm. It's not a wasted syllable, you could say. If you changed it or rearranged the words, the text would be diminished because of it. And it shows that like English itself is perfectly capable of being rendered in that beautiful, sonorous fashion that it may have used to been. But now it's not. We have sort of reduced it down to the lowest level. And part of that is just the loss of almost vocabulary, of a loss of even literary sense in the first place. Most people don't read or engage with that material. English has the most expansive vocabulary out of any language on the planet, and it's underutilized to say the least. So it has been diminished. People always point out these examples. You can pick up like early recordings of people from the 1910s or 1920s, average everyday people, and they spoke with a sort of eloquence that you wouldn't even hear from our chief scholars today, ever. And it's true. It's detectable. It's noticeable.
I mean, I'm guilty of it.
Me too.
My day to day is just
Yeah.
me and my other 30-year-old friends being like, bro, this is chopped.
Yeah, me too. We all do it, We're all participating in that sort of degradation. And that's what I mean. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but there is a loss, and that's something to consider. We are losing something by losing that aspect of our language. Or if it's lost on the whole, and this like whole range of expression becomes unfashionable or unpopular or even impossible because nobody can learn it or develop a normal way to speak it, then you are losing something, maybe a shade or range of meaning that is valuable, that can express something you wouldn't be able to in the most mundane language possible. So yeah, it's something.
Notice how the words with eloquent connotations have Latin origin and the basic words are Germanic.
It's true. Now, Germanics were simple peoples from the ungodly forest of Europe. They weren't used to refinement in any sense. You needed that Mediterranean lifestyle to express the deeper things in the world. There's no doubt.
What are like some examples of that? Can you explain that?
Just generally speaking, how like English is a hodgepodge mix mash of different influences, especially French, Latin, both like French is a variation of Latin and emerges later, but they have this original origin, and you have the Germanic original words. English started out as a Germanic language. The Anglo-Saxons, Old English, that was their language. And these are just two different branches of the Indo-European language family, you could say. But Latin, obviously with its origins in the Roman Empire, and then through the early church, or the Catholic Church, Latin became the language of literature, science, any sort of philosophy, etc., etc. What you see after the Norman conquest of England, the Normans who spoke French, Latin derived, and also were using Latin as the church language, which is being used in England too. But regardless, they had a sort of cultural currency. Once the Normans conquer England and rule over it, and over the next few centuries, the two languages, French and Old English, kind of fuse into a common language of sorts. You have a situation where English is kind of a hybrid. We have about 30% of our vocabulary in English is French derived in some sense. Another, I forget the exact percentage, like 10 or 20% is like Latin of some sort. The rest is Germanic derived. Because the Normans ruled England as a sort of elite, a lot of more elite words, you could say, words that relate to abstract concepts or techniques or anything of that sort, they have a French or a Latin derivation. simple words that describe mundane phenomenon, farming equipment, random objects, or just doing the basic things, those were maintained as Germanic, you could say, Germanic loanwords. And a lot of people say it's because the common people were dealing with common things, and the natural elite speaking a different language had a greater range of expression. And as they sort of fuse into a single language in some capacity, we have a situation now where our more abstract words or beautiful words or complicated words, they're French or Latin derived in some sense. And the common words like, yeah, I don't know.
We're getting a lot of good examples in the chat.
Yeah, break is Germanic, fracture is Latin. Yeah, dude, all three knows. Buy is Germanic, purchase is Latin. Perfect. Yeah, you see what I mean? Like it's some of the more refined concepts, more beautiful words, that exact expressive quality that we were just trying to describe. A lot of it is French and Latin derived. Reading Will Durant again. What do you think of the Freemasons? I don't know. I don't really think about the Freemasons that much. They've always been a fixture of this sort of like broader conspiracy theory, but they're ruling the world or they have some sort of secret influence. But I don't know. They just seem like a bunch of losers hanging out to me. Like they don't seem like they have a lot of influence or meaning it seems like they may have been some sort of secret society engaged in promoting liberalism through the French Revolution and through the 19th century. The Catholic Church definitely had an extreme reaction against them and accused them of being part of this broader satanic plot to overthrow the traditional order. And that's probably where a lot of these conspiracies around them sort of originate. Everybody knows that a lot of the American founding fathers were Freemasons, and their symbols are kind of pervasive on our currency and in the arrangement of Washington, D.C., and so on and so forth. But I don't really think they're that interesting or impressive. And I don't think modern day Masons have any connection to anything that could have been happening before. If there was some sort of spiritual aspect to it, some sort of tradition and esotericism, let's say, I think that's long gone and likely not understood by the current members. It seems like more like just a men's club of some sort that's kind of LARPing. I don't know, less interesting. I don't think they wield any influence or are very important anymore. But
it's a big LARP.
That's kind of what I feel like. That's my suspicion. Just like, oh, let's put on the little aprons and pledge to this, whatever, like the great architect of the universe. And, we're all secret. You have to be initiated. I don't think anybody knows what the symbols mean or anything. Let's see. There's a study that everyday Latin is disappearing from English. That's actually interesting, author. I'm not surprised. It's exactly what we're describing. If we're losing that more complicated range of expression and that the very words that you'd utilize to express something in a complicated, more ornate fashion are being lost, then yeah, Latin will be disappearing slowly. Illuminati's a LARP too. Yes, that's what I've been thinking too. Yeah, above that too. Sorry, with the lights in my face, guys, I can't read with my bad eyes usually, and the TV's a little far away. William's Domesday book seems interesting to me. Yeah, it is. It's one of the best. I posted about that in our Discord, actually, a link. There's a cool site where they've charted it. You could see a lot of the locations referenced in the book, charted on the map, so you could see all the cities or rather the towns in the north during the harrying of the north that were destroyed by the Normans, just devastated. It's really cool. It's a great historical source. It actually is. Historians love it. I'll put it that way. It's because it's a really well kept record of what was going on administratively during the Norman conquest. But yeah, the secret societies are a LARP, dude. Illuminati's a LARP too. The Illuminati doesn't even exist, like in any meaningful way. Who cares? Like people who blame it, like they're still getting together and they're controlling the world. Like, no, dude. There's no evidence of that, dude. I think there are people who exert a lot of influence in the modern world situation. Obviously, there's people who are trying to exert that type of control. I also think modernity is almost like this stomping behemoth that is too complicated, too intricate, too multifaceted to really control in a deliberate way. They're exerting influence, but it's not calculated. And if they're trying to, then they're doing a pretty poor job of it, ultimately.
Yeah, I just feel like we're seeing the how do I say this? The people trying the hardest to do it seem like they still can't even like really do it.
Yeah, I know.
Being as vague as I can.
Being as vague, yeah. Like they can't really, they don't have a full handle. I know what you mean. But Decker says that's what an Illuminati member would say. Yeah, you're right. You got me, dude. You got me. I am. This podcast is ground zero for Illuminati cultural influence. This is where it starts. This is how we're going to influence your interpretation of history and your understanding of the world. It's right here.
Can you talk about the 8 families of Rome?
I actually don't know what that reference is. Like, to be honest, the 8 families of Rome. Historically, is it something? My mind, we're just talking about the secret societies. I'm like immediately thinking of like some random secret society thing. But if you don't mind, user, fill me in, wake me up.
Thoughts on Professor Zhang?
I also don't know who Professor James
is
it that guy?
It's the Asian dude it's the Chinese dude that what's her face was talking about last stream.
Oh, okay.
She posted.
See, I haven't seen his content yet, but it was funny. Like a member of our Discord was posting him, and he had a video about the origin of the Jews or something, and he had like a map of warring states China on it. So I have to see where that starts. That might be some deep lore I have to investigate, but I actually don't know. Haven't seen any of his content or don't know anything about him. I'll have to check it out.
I rock with him. I think he's cool.
What do you think then?
Can you
The banks in the 1910s start of the Federal Reserve.
I mean, I think you could rip it, bro. It's
I could talk about it. I don't really know much about them, though. Like, yeah, they existed. They created the Federal Reserve. I don't know if the Federal Reserve and fractional reserve banking is really like the heart of all of our problems. I've heard people say that. I just don't know, dude.
I don't know anything.
I'm not an economist. I barely know how the economy works in a modern sense, like in a true way. So, like, oh, they took us away from the gold standard, and this is why they could just print the debt or whatever. I don't know, dude. It doesn't mean anything to me. Maybe there's something there, but it's just like these banks they exist. I don't know what else you want me to say. Like there's not much to talk about as far as I'm concerned. Like, banks have existed for a long time. A lot of people have blamed them for their problems. Going back to the Middle Ages, it's the same thing.
What was that like? So
it's just kind of funny. Like, that's why the Templars are basically targeted for persecution. Like, in the Middle Ages, they had ran a banking system. The King of France was in debt to them, basically liquidated them, accused them of heresy, et cetera, et cetera. All the Italian, like, merchant families in the north of Italy through the late Middle Ages, they were accused of, like, running the politics as a shadow cabal through their power of banking and manipulating the popes and so on and so forth. Like, some of it was true. Some of it was definitely exaggerated and propaganda from their enemies. What's funny is a lot of it was even propaganda from one rival family against another who was engaged in the same sort of system. So this idea that like, oh, it's the banks who are controlling society and absolutely just, running everything. It's all calculated and deliberate and they're manipulating the currency. Maybe it's true, but it's also a type of rhetoric that goes back in Western history 1,000 years at least. And, I don't know if there's a lot of merit to it. It just seems like if you were to think that there was a calculated plot to undermine civilization, it just seems like the institution you'd point at automatically. You'd be like, of course it's the bank. They control the money. Like, it doesn't mean it has to be, or it literally is the bank managing things or controlling it. I just don't know.
Well, okay. So, do you not think that the state of the economy in, like, a civilization is definitely just, like, kind of the main thing to focus on?
I don't think it's the main thing entirely. It is definitely an integral part or element, but it's not, like, the civilization itself. That's definitely, like... That's the modern Western conception for sure, that like the civilization is built up, can only prosper or develop culturally through its economic prosperity, and that's it. But it's definitely an element. It can definitely elevate parts of the culture, but there's also a way that the economic aspects undermine the culture itself and come at the expense of some cultural aspect that probably was there in the first place and existed in a more resilient fashion before economic prosperity or something.
Like a spiritual bankruptcy
something like
that.
Yeah. And of course, I'm speaking in generalities because we're not giving the particulars, but you definitely see that in Western history, for instance. Like the great emphasis on cultural prosperity economic prosperity, it comes with a rapidly changing culture and a diminishment of the traditional values. And you can argue that's good, but I think it's also a particular cultural view to say that civilization is just the economy. It's interesting. It's different than even the Chinese view for most of history, because for them, the economy was a feature of the society, of the civilization, but it wasn't the penultimate aspect. And in fact, it was an aspect that had to be almost carefully cultivated and managed and almost quarantined in its own sphere. It wasn't supposed to spill out into the rest of the society per se. You produced the normal amounts of goods to achieve survival, to achieve a general standard of living for the people, but the endless pursuit of economic excess was not their priority at all. For them, politics, the tradition, having some sort of like true harmony with the cosmic environment as they saw it, that was more important. And if the emperor allowed the economic aspects, the merchants, to gain too much power or sway in the civilization, it was actually a sign that he was not legitimate or fit to be the emperor in the first place. He was disrupting the harmony. He was letting things out of their natural place, out of their natural character, undermining the very hierarchy that makes civilization necessary. So I don't know. It's like you have economic prosperity. It's good, but is it the be-all, end-all? Is it the metric that we assess civilization by totally? I don't know if it should be. One of the reasons, like one of the ways I'll show or I'll demonstrate, going back to that topic, that you can't necessarily conflate the civilization with the economy. It's an interesting source I read a while back when I was in college, actually, but in Egypt, when the Fatimid Caliphate was taken over by the Ayyubids, and this is in Egypt, this is like 12th century. For context, Nile River, hugely productive economic zone, breadbasket of the Mediterranean going back to ancient times. But when the Ayyubids, this new dynasty, took over Egypt, they of course retained some elements of the bureaucracy from the dynasty that preceded them. And Saladin, the Sultan of the Ayyubids, ordered one of the bureaucrats to basically write this huge book compiling all of the tax practices. Like, basically, here's how you tax the Nile River, up and down, huge, expansive zone. And this book was a behemoth of a text because they didn't have a standardized taxation system and not even standardized measurements across the Nile River. Everything was determined based on tribal agreements and with different groups or town elders in this region. This is how we measure the farmland, and this is the agreement about how we pay taxes to the state, and so on and so forth. Basically, the whole point of it was, as you read between the lines, the way that they had taxed the Nile River hadn't changed since the time of the pharaohs. When the pharaohs ruled it, they did it one way, and this is even mentioned in the source. But they taxed it the same way. When the Greeks took it over, they taxed it the same way. When the Romans took over, they taxed it the same way. When the Islamic caliphates took over, they taxed it the same way, etc., etc., etc. You have about 3,000 years of history for the civilization where economically the structure and arrangement, at least the state's relationship to the economy, was pretty much static the entire time. And yet you saw thousands of years of cultural, linguistic, religious, political transformation, and all that happened with largely the same economic system.
Wow.
That's a good bit of evidence, or a good case, you could say, to show that like civilization itself isn't just the economy. It isn't just economic progress or economic change. The pivot of history, or at least the pivot of this civilization, relies on other factors outside of pure economic concerns, because the economy was largely the same, or at least, again, the state's relationship to the economy, for like 3,000 years, through a whole
it's
tumult
different,
of
like,
dynasties, religions, politics, etc. Yeah, 100%. So is it just the economy? No, I don't think so. I think there's more to the history there, or what actually develops civilization, what changes it. What do you mean stand for? I always see you.
What do you stand for, bro?
Or what do you even stand for? I always see you. I don't know. I've left a lot of what I stand for ambiguous. It's up to you to infer in some sense. What I really stand for, I don't want to take a particular political side or even necessarily a philosophical position, but I do stand for a sort of I want to promote a deeper view of history that kind of, and philosophy to some extent, that kind of cuts through a lot of the general understanding, the general narratives that are pervasive both in our understanding of history itself and political discourse. So we need to have a bit of a deeper view or more nuanced view of these things. So I like to challenge a lot of what's common or the common framework. It's a way to sort of cut to the heart of things, or at least make an attempt at it. And that's kind of what I stand for, a deeper engagement with the reality of history itself as far as we can know it. And a little more caution against these like general narratives that everybody kind of uses as a weapon or a cudgel against each other.
Ronan, thank you for the follow.
Thank you. Because when you get caught up, we've talked about it in a few different streams and some of the sort of seminar segments, but yeah, reevaluation of all values, almost. I'm trying to do it from a neutral, or as best as I can, a neutral point of view at first, but it's almost like a step back. Like, look, I see the same debates and going on. I'll give an example, actually, before I get too ranty, but I don't know if you guys watch this at all, but there's always these like religion debates on the internet all the time. Christians versus Muslims, like it's endless. You have apologists from both sides, these popular personalities going on and having the same debates. And it's like, Islam's a fake religion and you got to believe in Christ. And no, Christianity's false. You got to like do that. And it's just, they have the same points, the same arguments. And what's funny, when you read some of the sources on Islamic history, for instance, you will see some of the Christian arguments in these apologetic debates. They've been used since like the 8th century, almost word for word. And like when the caliphs would hold theological debates in the 8th century over Christianity and Islam, some of the perspectives that would be brought up by Christians are the same as you'll hear from the apologetic space now. Identical. It's hilarious. And the whole point is both sides are engaged in this type of narrative history. Absolutely. They'll take St. Thomas Aquinas. Yes, he's one of them. A lot of his arguments are used by apologists, sometimes who aren't even aware of his particular, points of view. It just gets trotted out. Like Muhammad was a violent warlord, so he couldn't be a prophet, like just in a nutshell, as an example. That's something that's been saying. It was said by St. John of Damascus in the 8th century or 7th century, actually. Or maybe 8th. Now I'm forgetting. Whatever. Doesn't matter. It's been a talking point for a long time. And you still see it. And you'll hold another debate where it's Christianity versus Islam. It's the same narrative history, just going back and forth with no sort of progress. And the Christian side, the Christian appraisal of Islam on these popular debate spaces is really poor. It's almost like a primitive understanding. And there's no effort to actually understand what Islam represents, its own internal theological diversity or anything of that sort. And often on the Muslim side, their representation or engagement with Christians is similarly primitive or simple. I will actually give more credit to the Muslim side. I've seen more from them. They do. They have a greater sensitivity to Christian differences theologically and will be more willing to engage with them. But regardless, it's the same type of narrative history over and over again, and it never makes any progress. Same debate for over 1,000 years with some of the same points and same arguments. I don't know if we can ever solve that debate or come to a sufficient resolution, but at least when we're going to use historical points in these debates or philosophical or theological points, we can do it without being like complete simpletons. We don't just have to try and sublimate the information and twist it into our own narrative formulation that serves our argument in the moment. I guess what I'm standing for is we should actually look at the history itself as best we can, parse out the arguments, look at what this side really represents. And this is beyond even just Christianity versus Islam. This is just generally. It's what we do with politics, with like China versus the West or something of that sort. Basically, can we get rid of these narratives and think about history differently? Or do we have to come to a narrative in order to approach history in the first place?
TBH, Rosa Parks a communist plant? ?
I've heard that. It was definitely coordinated. I mean, you teach that in the school system too. Like when I was taught as a kid, it used to be like, no, it was a spontaneous event. She just engaged in this protest. But no, it definitely was coordinated. They planned it. They planted her on the bus that day. It was all orchestrated in that sense. So there was some level of pre-existing organization. Whether you want to think that's because she was like, and I mean, they were connected to certain communist organizations that were loosely operating in that context. But I think it's some deeper like communist plot set up by the Soviets or something to cause racial discord in the United States. Maybe not. I don't know.
Scrolling back up, what was
Let's look
user
at some
52?
more.
I'm getting to your questions. Which
I do want
presidential
to address all of
attempt
these if we can.
assassination is the most interesting to you?
Attempted assassination or
Yeah.
successful? Okay, attempt.
It says attempt.
Honestly, that's a good question. I don't know. Some of the attempts, like, honestly, against like Teddy Roosevelt or something, maybe it's because I know less about it, but it seems like assassination attempts like that are so like rooted in the immediate political concerns of their day. They don't seem like they could be extrapolated, or like you don't have much to say about them. Like, this guy has a very particular political grievance in his own time period, and he's going to go shoot Teddy Roosevelt or something, fails, is unsuccessful, and like, we don't even know his motive really anymore. It's not really talked about because it was so rooted in the particularities of that day. It's nothing grand or
That one was spontaneous.
I think, was it actually? Yeah.
I mean, I'm asking.
I don't know. I think it was, but no. I mean, you have to plan at some level, of course, but I don't know.
Like,
It's just attempted. His guess is interesting. I mean, we'll see with the Trump assassination attempts, even though he wasn't actively president when they occurred. Like, there's more to uncover there in terms of motive, of course, and that's kind of interesting. But
do you think any of those attempts were done by the powers that be?
I'm not sure about that. Maybe it's not. I mean, it's not impossible.
Higher powers.
Like higher fire. I mean, I don't know, dude. It could be, but so here's the thing. I'm really hesitant with conspiracy theories generally until they're really substantiated, because there's some that are just like drooling, like simpleton stupid. Like, you have to be a Neanderthal to really believe in it. And a lot of conspiracy theories, they rely on this kind of power of inference. They'll lay out a bunch of details that don't necessarily have a causative connection. And then they rely on the sort of audience, the recipient, to take those details and literally put the red string together and actually infer a causative pattern that's not really present in the detail itself. And sometimes that's true. Sometimes there really is a causative relationship and it happens. But people who also dismiss conspiracy theories and say that they're impossible because you couldn't keep all of that a secret or this or that, it's like, that's also kind of stupid to me. You could definitely keep things a secret, even high-level planning and operations. By definition, every military operation before it's implemented is a conspiracy theory. It is a theory based on these generals and these officers who are planning a military action. They're keeping it secret amongst themselves. It requires a ton of logistical movement and planning, et cetera, and the public's not privy to it. The information rarely leaks, and there could be a whole war plan drawn up with all the parts set on the board and ready to execute. That's by definition a conspiracy theory of sorts. It's a more mundane example because it's not this shadow control of the politics, but that level of orchestration and planning with secrecy is possible in principle. So it's not like conspiracy theories couldn't happen or something of that sort. But I don't know. I have to really see the substantive, like, causative example. Would the powers that be in the United States be capable of assassinating a president? It's definitely possible. Have I been confident that that's happened? I'm less sure about that. Definitely less sure. Even with JFK or something. I don't know. That's the most common one, where it's like, oh, this was a total inside job or something. There's other powers that be. But I don't know. I haven't seen it fully substantiated. And recently heard that in the early days, most Muslims would align with Sufi beliefs. Yeah, I think that's generally true in Islamic history. A lot of what's associated with Sufism today is this sort of esoteric or mystical current of Islam, used to be general normative belief or practice in the Islamic world pre-modernity, so pre-19th century, really. Most Muslims were connected to a Sufi tariqa in some sense, whether they were fully initiated or the Sufi sheikh was sort of the central fixture in their village and town or city, and they were participating in the gatherings and so on. Does that mean the average person had a fully fleshed out Sufi metaphysics or theology? I don't think so. I think through most of history, if you were a commoner in any civilization, the commoners in pre-modernity, they had a very unsophisticated theological view of the religion they participated in, and that was just a necessary fact of them being commoners. Most commoners, their engagement with religion was purely practice and not theoretical or systematic theology. That was a debate for the literate scholars to have. And you'd often see it where different peasant groups, like I know Russia's an example of this all the way through the 19th century as well, where the peasants were engaged in like practices that would have been completely foreign to regular Eastern Orthodoxy, and their theology, like they really did believe if they worked hard enough as peasants in farming, they would go to heaven based on that merit alone. And that wasn't necessarily something that was taught on a theological level by the Orthodox Church, but that was their full belief. And they thought literally that the rich boyars were doomed to hell just by the fact that they were rich. Like they had this weird predestination view that was not in the theology. That's how they practice it. That was their engagement. So even for the common Muslim through history, they probably engaged in some Sufi practice, but did they have a fully developed Sufi metaphysics? Not necessarily, but that's just the reality of it. That's how it goes. And then Otto, welcome Otto. I didn't see you in here. Thanks for coming. But the Sufism of today is very different from back then. It is definitely different, but it's similar enough. There's a lot of similarities too. Sufism in the past was even more kind of extreme from the general, like I guess I'm trying to say from the Salafi framework that's usually very critical of Sufi practices in any way. And that's what makes it even more interesting that most Muslims were nominally associated with Sufism when there was a lot of very peculiar beliefs, you could say. Yasser Qadi talks about how Islam was simple for the commoner but had depth for literate scholars. For sure, it does. And that's probably true of Christianity too and other religions, but certainly the case for Islam. Has those dimensions. There's endless theological disputes you could have if you were a literate scholar, but the practices themselves are straightforward for the commoner who's engaged in other business and has other affairs to tend to. They don't necessarily have to believe that the Quran is uncreated as opposed to created, or God's attributes are really distinct from his essence or identical to his essence. Those are not the debates the commoners had to engage in order to pray 5 times a day, go to the mosque on Friday, and uphold those religious obligations.
It's very practice-pilled.
Yeah.
What's a tech in warfare that you think was transformational besides gunpowder?
Besides gunpowder, that's a really good question, actually. Let me think. If it's like a weapons technology or anything of that sort, or an armor technology, I would say before gunpowder, like true like steel plate armor was really transformational on the battlefield. It was hard to contend against, and you see examples of this even after gunpowder is introduced generally on the battlefield. Like I have in mind immediately the German Peasants' War after the Protestant Reformation in the early 16th century.
Okay, explain that.
Yeah, so if you don't know anything about the German Peasants' War, it's right after, the Protestant Reformation, right? Like Martin Luther.
Like barely. That's why I'm here with you.
That's true. Yeah, you got to explain it. So for everybody else, if you have some sort of familiarity with this, that's fine. But Protestant Reformation occurs. It's Martin Luther. He's a reformer. He breaks away from the Catholic Church in the 16th century, doctrinal disputes. But he's persecuted. He's basically exiled by the Holy Roman Emperor. He's excommunicated by the Catholic Church, but he's given protections by certain nobles in the Holy Roman Empire too. And the Holy Roman Empire is basically Germany, if you think about it like that. Easy way to think about it. But his movement kind of takes off. There's other reformers, other inspirations, et cetera, et cetera. Eventually, a bunch of peasants through the Holy Roman Empire adopt his message, adopt his framework, and are rebelling against their noble lords who are, of course, own the land, subject them to a type of serfdom. These peasants use the Protestant ethos, the Protestant framework, to argue that there is no reality to hierarchy itself. Just like Luther argued that there shouldn't be a true church hierarchy with real authority, the peasants were arguing that the nobles didn't really have authority from God to rule over them. And they started this almost early class warfare against the nobles. And it was a mass movement. It had a lot of support. Eventually, Luther condemned the peasants peasants and sided with the princes, the nobles who were fighting them. But I bring this up because even though the peasants had some gunpowder weapons, they had a lot of castles, they had, masses of soldiers, you could say, armed peasants. The nobles, with a small amount of knights and plate armor and just the kind of general tech of the day, just smashed them in the battles.
Wow.
Like decimated them, slaughtered them, you could say. The technological difference was so unequal that the peasants couldn't really do anything. And you could argue it's a lack of like military command on the peasant side. They didn't have the real expertise, but in the actual battles themselves, it was very one-sided in favor of oftentimes outnumbered nobles who were, of course, outfitted in the cutting-edge tech of the day. So just in terms of weaponry or armor, I think even just full steel plate or something like that is really transformational on the battlefield. It makes a single soldier just way deadlier or really difficult to contend with without specialized weaponry. And it's only really gunpowder that does undermine the prevalence of those armored knights on the battlefield in the first place. We can do that one first. How do you feel about the comparisons often made between America and Rome? I can see why the comparisons are made, and they're not necessarily run like prima facie. There's maybe something to them, but I think it's a tired comparison too. I don't think our political situation is exactly identical to Rome's just because we're a powerful empire, quote unquote, and they were a hegemon or a powerful empire in their own right. I think there's more going on there. It's a deeper issue. And it's just like the conditions are so different that a perfect comparison is impossible. The only pretense that it kind of makes sense in a certain way and where it would actually be interesting to me, the founding fathers of America were very influenced by the politics of Rome. They really studied the Roman Republic and were trying to understand precisely why it fell in order to avoid the same maybe structural conditions when they were creating their own republic. And they didn't want the United States to slip into a dictatorship or a tyranny either. And it'd be interesting if we did have some sort of bizarre transition or our republic fell or it slipped into a dictatorship. And it would be interesting if that was because of the very structure of a republic itself. Like if there was something in a Republican state system of government that was almost dialectical. Like if it does degrade, it will degrade in precisely this way that leads to a fall, to a replacement by a single despot, a single emperor authority. Like that would actually be interesting. And that's where the comparison could be cool. But when we just say like, oh, this happened today in American politics, it's just like the fall of Rome or the end of civilization. I don't know. Those comparisons seem a little shallow to me, less convincing. But could Napoleon actually conquer Europe? I don't think he could have and had it last for too long. He definitely could have militarily. It's potential. It's possible. But I think this is a time when nationalism is really starting to emerge. I don't think the Germans would have taken too kindly to perpetual French domination in the exact moment when they're gaining a sort of national consciousness as Germans. I think there would have been real resistance to that effort. And Napoleon's empire would have fallen as a lot of these other multicultural empires fell at the beginning of the 20th century. It would have been very vulnerable to those same structural issues. So I don't think he could have conquered all of Europe indefinitely.
Top Roman emperor? Question mark.
Top.
Must be Aurelian.
It better be Aurelian. Yeah, dude. I was gonna say I didn't even see the comment yet, but I was gonna say Aurelian's like definitely. He gave a lifeline to the empire for another like century and a half where it wasn't guaranteed that could happen. So restorer of the world for a reason. I think definitely a good emperor. I always say as a joke when people ask this, because it's a common question, I say Elagabalus every time. Favorite emperor. He really represents what Rome was about. So my favorite for sure, Elagabalus, based. We love him. Worshiping the sun god.
Yeah, wait, tell us why more.
Some people might get the reference, but it's a joke because he's according to the sources, he was an interesting emperor. He engaged in a lot of what one could say and what some people in the time said was degenerate behavior, but
like banging dudes.
A lot of them, yeah, a lot of them all the time. And trying to become a woman, and he led an army of prostitutes into the city of Rome, gave them like a battle speech before they went out and engaged in their business. He was doing a lot of crazy stuff.
He was kind of a freak.
Yeah, he's a freak. He got assassinated very quickly, and the plot started by his own grandmother to get him off the throne.
Oh, wow.
It's pretty brutal. So I always say him as a joke. What was in the Library of Alexandria? Probably a lot of Platonic literature that's missing now, or commentaries would be my guess, but I'm not sure. I mean, Platonism, it was a lot of philosophy. That was kind of the dominant intellectual current of the day. A lot of works on rhetoric, too, that was another very popular medium in antiquity, you could say. So, for certain things, it was probably like with Plato, a lot of his lecture notes and kind of his other works that are now lost to history. And there's probably some works on Aristotle where we would have had his dialogues. We know he wrote dialogues that didn't survive, and we only have his lecture notes. So in the library, we probably had a lot of stuff like that. That would have been cool to have. Would have really fleshed out our understanding of early philosophy. Maybe some more stuff on the pre-Socratics. But somebody said there was parallels between Protestantism and Wahhabism. I didn't see that comment fully, but I think that's definitely true. It's actually an interesting area of history to explore. I think Wahhabism has a lot of almost latent Protestant tendencies here or there that I have always wondered if they came from a sort of British influence, more or less, at the same time, especially with the early Wahhabi founders and the House of Saud's connections to the British Empire early on. I wonder if there was some tendency there. I know it's also rooted in earlier theologians like Ibn Taymiyyah, this kind of Athari, Ibn Hanbal, this Athari view of Islamic theology, but still, it just seems like very Protestant to me. Yeah, what are some things Martin Luther was right about? Richard. Thank you, Richard. Yeah, Martin Luther, in my opinion, was certainly right about the corrupt practices in the church. Like, there were real issues in the Catholic Church that had started really after the 14th century, the Black Death. The practice of simony was one, where you could basically buy church titles. Like, if you had enough money, you could pay to be a bishop, like, straight up.
Damn.
Say, hey, this is I want to be the bishop of this realm. And at the time in Europe, being a bishop, it came with actual land, like an estate to run, tax money. Like, it was a position of power, and authority in these different realms run by the church. And you definitely had a lot of corrupt individuals buying into that. There was also an issue, what was called absenteeism. People would hold multiple bishopric seats and never visit the actual communities that they held the title in. Oftentimes, they bought multiple of these titles and seats, and then it left these whole regions or even whole cities and towns and counties without any real church leadership present administering anything, which led to corrupt practices amongst the priesthood, who were sometimes in this period illiterate and not really good at the theological issues or conducting the mass in accordance to Rome's teachings or anything of that sort.
So it was just bad.
Yeah, a lot of corrupt practices. The famous indulgences are another element. So Luther was right in calling this out. And this is precisely why you see the Catholic Church sort of recognize that Luther was right about these practices in the Council of Trent when they engage in this sort of counter-Reformation effort. And they're like, okay, what can we address? We'll get rid of the practices while reaffirming Catholic doctrine. They basically conceded that, simony and absenteeism and the specific sale of indulgences was corrupt and shouldn't have been done.
So they got rid of that.
Yeah, so he was right about that, I think. He was definitely correct in pointing out those church failings. It would have been better probably for the unity of Christendom if it didn't lead to a full split in the church and the subsequent just deadly wars of religion you saw afterwards. But if there was a sort of reform effort like Luther initially intended that occurred within the church, Christianity would have been, or Christendom itself, would have been far more unified and cohesive going forward. Instead, it's still permanently fractured to this day.
Want to keep it.
Been watching / listening for a few weeks. Are y'all religious or not? Just curious. Love the vids. Yeah, I am religious. I'll say it. I don't go into a lot of the personal religious stuff too much, or my own personal beliefs. It's interesting. I will one day, or if everybody's really curious in some sense. But I'm also just interested in religion itself as a real study or as a concept, like the true study of religion. And that's kind of the angle I go for here, is to talk about it on that level and not just promote my own individual religious beliefs or justify them or try and persuade people to adopt them and so on. I'm more interested in just the study of religion itself. But I am personally religious, yes.
Otto had, it's not a question directly, but he just said, I think communism is a utopic ideology which can't be achieved, which is why I hate it.
Right. It is utopian in this sense, definitely. And it's utopian because it's predicated on this idea of exact, predictable, almost mechanical progress in society itself. It's because Marx was a Hegelian of sorts. He inverted Hegel, but he does believe that society is deterministic in its sort of progress through class warfare, through the sort of natural unfolding of economic conditions in a dialectical relationship. You will necessarily arrive at communism or this kind of classless society once the conditions are proper. So in that sense, it is utopic. It's like, yes, we will progress to this final vision where class is eliminated and so on. And of course, that's predicated, or it relies on the assumption that society does work like that it has this predictable dialectical inherent process that does arrive at classlessness at a certain point. And that's where the real contention arises. Even later Marxists were less likely or less inclined to think about that or think about society that way, almost dogmatically. So actually, it is more complicated in a certain sense. Like Gramsci was one who kind of promoted a different vision of class warfare and moving away from the specific dialectical process. Even some of the early Bolsheviks, like Trotsky, who did believe in the deterministic kind of movement of society, said it's actually more complicated in the revolution itself, and you have to take measures that seem inappropriate from a Marxist perspective in order to safeguard and maintain the revolution as it is. So yeah, you see the practical realities change that sort of dogmatic approach, but it is inherent in the type of thinking. It is utopian in that sense. California's namesake is a mythical Amazon pagan queen from a mysterious novel found in Constantinople. Definitely not weird. Yeah, it is true. It's
Wait, so what is that?
because the Spanish named California. It's from this novel where it's like it's this queen. She's given, interestingly, the title they use for queen is like Khalifa or Khalifa, which is like a female variant of the term caliph, like caliph for Islam. So, and she's like this mythical queen on this island in the West and so on. And initially the Spanish thought California was an island. So when they discovered it, they named it after this novel that had come from Constantinople when the Byzantine Empire was conquered by the Ottomans, and there was a movement of Byzantine scholars into the West, helped stimulate the Renaissance a little bit. In any case, this novel was from Constantinople, became popular in Spain, and then it kind of it becomes twisted and turned. The character from this novel, or at least the title, they use it to designate this quote-unquote island in the West that they think they found, California, and that's still the name today.
That's awesome.
So it's an interesting, but it is funny to think, like, because outside of the queen, the mythical queen on a Western island, the term that's used, like Khalifa, it's like funny to think that California, it is a kind of bastardization of the term caliph or caliphate, in that way. Since scrolls around the library, thoughts on the stuff Graham Hancock pushes. Okay.
About lost great civilizations.
When it comes to Graham Hancock, I'll put it this way. I'm not explicitly opposed to the possibility of civilization being older than it's conventionally understood to be. It's that wouldn't surprise me deeply. Say? Graham Hancock believes that. Have you seen any of his like Joe Rogan appearances or anything like that?
Didn't we kind of talk about it like a couple streams ago?
I actually I don't remember if we talked about it or not, but he basically believes that around 12,000 or 14,000 years ago, somewhere in there was actually an advanced civilization or civilizations that existed before the ice, or at the end of the ice age, before the Younger Dryas period or something like that, for a meteor impact. I kind of forget the exact details of his chronology, but this civilization existed. It was technologically advanced, and it had an enormous influence in spreading a sort of package of civilization to other peoples and other cultures. And there was some sort of like cataclysmic event that ended this civilization, and there was maybe survivors of it who then continued to spread how some of this important technology or cultural information or religious belief or something of that sort. And this is what directly informed and influenced the development of civilizations elsewhere later, like Egypt or the Mayans rather, or Olmecs,
What
et
does
cetera,
he
et
say
cetera.
the cataclysmic event was?
I forget now because it's been a while since I've seen his stuff, but it was just about like around 11,000 BC or something of that sort. It was a meteor impact, I think. The
Classic.
Man, I'm trying to remember now. I'm kind of blanking on it, but again, the whole point is I'm not opposed to the existence of an ancient civilization per se, but I don't think Graham Hancock's done a good job of substantiating that this is actually occurred. A lot of his evidence seems to me to be tangential or sort of pointing out patterns that existed in later civilizations and saying, see, this couldn't have just emerged in this time period. It had to have some sort of, had to be predated, by another civilization that had to be more advanced and teach them how to do this. And he also believes certain monuments in Egypt are like older than the mainstream historians or archaeologists would claim that they'd be, and like the remnants of this old civilization, et cetera, et cetera. And it is true. He says like the archaeological establishment is against him and has unfairly suppressed him and so on and so forth. But it is true that like he doesn't have strong archaeological evidence on his side. Like everything in archaeology and even genetics, if you trace human population migration, if you trace even historical records and how they're attested to, they do point to pretty much the origin of civilization that the mainstream believes it happened in, like settled civilization in real cities around 3000 BC or so. And before that, smaller farming communities to about 10,000 BC, like the first domestication of crops. But he's pushing it way back, way earlier. And I don't know. I don't think it's fully substantiated. So not opposed, but I've never been convinced by his presentation of the information. What is the Orthodox Church wrong about? It's a good question. I don't know what they're wrong about per se. I will say, like, what I don't like theologically about the Eastern Orthodoxy, and what I've tried to wrap my head around, and I could probably be convinced of it. I tend to, when I study religion or what appeals to me and what makes sense to me philosophically, I do lean towards divine simplicity. I really do. I think it's the best model to sort of understand an infinite God in some sense. And I could explain, my buddy's looking at me like, what are you talking about right now? But I could explain some of this.
I'm also reading the user's question too.
Okay.
Which I do want to get to.
I lean towards divine simplicity. And in Eastern Orthodoxy, especially like with the Palamite theology from Gregory of Palamas, the essence energies distinction, I'm not so sure about. I've heard it explained in different ways. Sometimes it's been reconciled with a type of divine simplicity that I would be familiar or comfortable with accepting. But when they maintain a real distinction between God's essence and his energies, and real ontological distinction, that is, for me, that's difficult to sort of reconcile. I haven't been fully persuaded on that point, but it would be interesting to see. I know there's people who are deep into that and could maybe express it, but I think, I don't know, when you have essence and energies really distinct from each other and both are God, but they're not each other in some sense, for me, it emerges into a sort of dependence issue, like what depends on what. That's what I think initially. Like, what grounds the other? Are the attributes, or not the attributes, but the energies grounded in the essence? And if so, are they not dependent on it and lesser in some sense? And if they're fully God as well, does that mean that there's an aspect of God really distinct from his essence that is dependent and contingent on another thing or grounded in another thing? I don't know. I always lean towards divine simplicity, so that's kind of a theological issue I have with Eastern Orthodoxy, or at least that particular strain of Palamite theology. But I'd have to see more. I really would.
Thoughts on Kafka?
Thoughts on Kafka? I mean, cool. Like, Metamorphosis is always famous for a reason, but it's never really appealed to me deeply. I'm also just not a big like short story or novel guy in any way. So interesting stuff, that kind of like existentialist approach. It's interesting, but it's not necessarily appealing to me. Not something I dwell on or really think about that often. but a good writer.
Well, thoughts on late stage capitalism just being literal communism, but the autocrats are tech bros.
I mean, that seems to be closer to the reality than anything else, and it's also why like I've said it at different time, but like just using the same kind of reified categories of communism versus capitalism to debate economic issues today. I'm not sure that the terms are as salient as they used to be. Like what we have is not really capitalism in a meaningful sense, and it's not really communism in a traditional like sense, anyways. So we're talking about something else, like a new kind of modern hybrid or fusion. It's maybe its own monster, and like evaluating it using the terms from 200 years ago seems less helpful. But yeah, if it does emerge and there's some sort of redistributive system with the tech bros on top, it's not impossible. We're already thoroughly dependent on the tech. Like it's already we have a drip feed of tech every single day, infiltrating our lives. We need it, and I'm on it all the time. So they definitely have us hooked in that sense. And as you pointed out as well, Al-Athri, the NVIDIA is the linchpin of our economy now. It's what's driving all of our growth, more or less. So yeah, it seems poised to end up with something like that, where it is just the elites being tech bros who have captured the human experience, which is now intimately rooted and connected to interaction with tech and use of tech. And that's it. It's nothing else.
Decker says it's more like feudalism, and then Al-Athri says, nah, bro, you'll take the UBI.
You'll take the UBI. Yeah, exactly.
You'll take it and you'll enjoy it.
What is this thing I keep seeing
Gang.
about Agartha? Man, I don't know about Agartha. We mentioned Agartha. Somebody asked about it last stream too, and like we gave like an account of it. I don't know why people are bringing up Agartha and talking about.
I've been seeing a lot of memes about it recently.
It has been popping off, but
Wigartha.
I didn't see that. That's pretty funny.
Wigartha was pretty funny.
Yeah, I did see. I don't know if they were real. I saw years ago, supposedly, some documents from the Third Reich where they were giving submarine coordinates to Antarctica and mentioned Agartha with like some sort of map. I've heard that they were validated, but it's been years since I've seen it. I have no idea if they're real. It's probably completely made up, and I fell for it.
Well,
but it was very bizarre.
Debunk, right? You just like the proposed maps, we just go there and see it, right?
Yeah, but that's when the conspiracies go, and it's like you can't actually go to Antarctica, and it's blurred on Google Images, like the South Pole, and it's all,
conveniently.
There's really an entrance to the hollow Earth there that the world governments keep secret because they're interacting with the Agarthans and getting secret technology, or who knows what's happening. I don't know what's going on, honestly. Yeah, and we don't know. That's what I was saying last time. Depending on what strain of Agartha truther you are, you either believe they're aliens or Nordics or like real Aryans living in the earth. I don't know. Göbekli Tepe's interesting, but the rest of his stuff is completely unproven. That's for Graham Hancock, and yeah, that's true. Because Göbekli Tepe's real, like that is real, attested to thing. But then there's all these conspiracy theories around it now.
I know nothing about this.
Göbekli Tepe's like an old, it's an temple-like complex system. It's now modern-day Turkey, and what makes it unique and interesting, it's older than like Mesopotamia, for instance. I forget the exact years it's from. It's from like 5,000 or 6,000 BC, somewhere in there. I might be wrong. Maybe like somebody can correct me.
Samples, and that's how they know it's older or something.
Yeah, you could see based on where it's buried in the sediment. You can carbon date some of it. Like but you can tell it. It's also
for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, it's old. It's old.
That's crazy.
But and it's pretty advanced. It's like more advanced than you'd expect Neolithic settlements to be at the time. And it wasn't a permanent settlement. It's some type of like temple complex of sorts, but there's a lot of conspiracies now. The Graham Hancock types use it as proof of civilization being older because this particular settlement pushed back the timeline a little bit for at least that type of settlement complexity. But now they also say that archaeologists are covering up the site because they found even more info that proves Graham right, and it's this whole conspiracy to shut it down, basically. And I don't think that part's true, but Göbekli Tepe is interesting, just as an archaeological site, absolutely. I mean, it's old.
Al-Athri says thoughts on the death of good fantasy novels. I mean, you don't really like those, right?
I don't like fiction at all, to be honest. I don't read it. Never was too invested in it. But I do think it's a loss. Like, if there is again, it may tie into that general degradation we've described or talked about already. It's good to have it. It's good to have some sort of real literary effort, some fantasy novel that pushes the boundaries. Like Lord of the Rings is always the example everybody goes to because it set the sort of precedent for a lot of that fantasy genre. But yeah, it is a loss in that sense. I'm not too happy about it, even if I don't read it myself. You like to see real cultural output. You like to see quality being made. When everything is just degrading into, we always use the term slop, and it's very current in the culture right now. But I think people are becoming more and more aware of just how sloppy everything is. So when you just have more slop and a loss of quality, there is an issue with that. It is sad, no matter what genre. Let's see. Is this a free space? Yeah, sure. It's totally free. You can say whatever you want.
You guys can rip whatever you want. I don't care.
Yeah, we're chilling. Julio says, God Hook, thank you for the great conversation. Yeah, dude, thank you for being here. I appreciate it, Julio.
New follower, Julio. Thank you.
Thoughts on Ernst Jünger? I like Storm of Steel. I like Jünger. I think it's funny. He's definitely become a fixture, especially on the online, right? As like the based warrior. This is what we have to imitate. This is good. I've always found him to be more interesting in comparison or sort of in dialogue with Remarque. If you read like All Quiet on the Western Front, if you read those two together, Jünger is more interesting in a certain sense, just as a counterpart, because he does have this sort of almost quasi-mystical view of war, or even just in Storm of Steel itself, he's almost like a neutral view of the war effort and the horrors of it. He's far more interested in what makes a good officer and leadership and the lessons he learned from war, and that is interesting compared to All Quiet on the Western Front, which is certainly trying to sell you a particular interpretation of war being inherently traumatic, of stealing the youth, of being led by people who have no connection to the horrors itself. So for me, Junger's always been interesting in sort of dialogue with that, very popular and famous message from All Quiet on the Western Front. This sort of his particular views of war and it as this almost like quasi-mystical experience because it pushes human nature to its ultimate point. I'm not so sure about, or I don't find them to be particularly compelling, especially because Jünger has become such a fixation of certain internet right-wing elements who are trying to almost LARP as based warriors themselves, which is always kind of funny to me. It's like with Evola too. It's a similar kind of audience for those types who are always trying to take their ideas and say, no, this is where we got wrong. The reason the West sucks is because we're not based like mystic warriors anymore. It's like, I don't know if that's it. I don't know if that's the exact issue we have here. It's probably deeper than that. Adam says ADS is a better take than the ortho take, but I think it becomes cope at a certain point. Maybe it could be cope, but I don't know. I do lean towards it just generally over real distinctions in God. I just have a hard time really thinking about actual differences in nature that exist ontologically in God. I think there is like a dependency issue that arises. I don't know. You either have some weird interdependency where God is really contingent and almost just a brute fact and not necessary anymore, or some of the attributes or energies or however we describe them are dependent on the essence, and they, in my mind, that makes them ontologically lower in some sense. They're not truly necessary, even if they're eternally dependent or internal to God. I don't know. I still think there's an issue there. And of course, if the essence is dependent on the attributes to exist, like a whole would be dependent on its parts, then that's probably even a worse option. Like God is truly just a composite then. Like he's a true like composite whole made up of parts. And I don't know if that's really what you want to say about the infinite necessary being in some sense. You're kind of you're ceding a lot of ground philosophically to other perhaps atheist arguments that could undermine that position.
And subjectivity and shit like
Yeah,
that.
I mean, totally, dude. Like, it opens a can of worms, you could say. But yeah, I don't know. There can be issues with divine simplicity too. I think certain interpretations of it, especially when they're integrated into other theological systems, you'll say divine simplicity is sort of a philosophical solution, but then you'll talk about God later as if he's really engaged in multiple actions and doing other things, which is not what divine simplicity would allow. Like I see that a lot, especially on the Christian side, admittedly. But in any case, the Nazca lines, very interesting. I heard recently that there was some, I don't know if it was totally validated, if it was proven again or repeated, but there was some AI assistance in discovering new Nazca lines in Peru, which would be very interesting if true. Found new patterns or new arrangements, but yeah, it seems like people, I don't think it's like too crazy to think that they did it. A lot of people point to those as like aliens or something else, like it'd be impossible for humans to make it, but I'm not so convinced. I think with some mathematical knowledge and which they likely had, it's possible. It was settled. It's not super ancient or outside the scope of human ability in my estimation. It is very impressive, but it's not impossible to simply do. Have you ever seen the Nazca lines, by the way?
No.
You should look them up, like in Peru. It's these huge like patterns, depictions of animals and different figures, but across miles and miles of the Atacama Desert, like in Peru, way out there. And people say you can only really see the full pattern from a bird's eye, like airplane view almost, And there's like, how did they do that when... how do they coordinate even the arrangement or the production of the lines if they didn't have that perspective themselves, But
or like, why did they even do it? Because they wouldn't be able to like appreciate it from all the way up there.
Well, it's like they couldn't even see it from all the way up there in the first place to make the arrangements properly. Like there was no bird's eye view, and like how did they get these perfect geometric patterns and figures spanning miles and miles and miles if they were having to do it on the ground and couldn't actually see what they were creating or coordinate it that way? I think I will say we're the only life in the universe entirely. Don't care how big it is. Doesn't matter to me. We're the only ones. There's no such thing as aliens. But yeah, what is the question going to be? Yeah,
like if you had to choose, like which one of like the human accomplishments like seems so improbable that it could like people
like to me, none of them. That's the thing. Like to me, they're entirely accomplishable from the human perspective. I don't see why they wouldn't be. Like it just, for me, the ancient alien stuff just comes from this like deep, almost degradation of our human ancestors. Like they're so thoroughly incapable, and it's really modern people with our technology so much smarter. It's like I bet there's a whole host of crafty, ingenious, just ingenuity that the ancients were capable of that might not have been recorded in the historical sources. The technique might not have survived, but it didn't mean it didn't exist. So like, for instance, an example I have of this, or what first pops to mind, like Greek fire. For instance, I don't know if you've heard of this too. Byzantines, Eastern Rome, 6th century, 7th century, 8th century, they basically had like flamethrowers on their ships using some sort of like sticky napalm-like substance. And
how would it like project?
Oh no, they had it in these tubes on the ships and shot it out, and it would coat the water, set it on fire. They destroyed an entire Abbasid Caliphate fleet that was invading Constantinople with it. I mean, it was unbelievable, destructive weapon. Its creation process was a closely guarded state secret. There was like state paid alchemists who had the secret recipe to make this stuff and actually utilize it. Closely guarded secret. Unfortunately, the records of it don't survive. We don't know how they made it or how they utilized it. Just that it was their real secret weapon. They'd break out in naval battles, and it was devastating and greatly feared in the Mediterranean. That is some interesting tech that you wouldn't expect from the early Middle Ages, and yet they were able to deploy it effectively. And it was so devastating as a weapon of war. So there's other accounts of it and sources, but we don't know exactly how they made it. Imagine those sources, those records of it didn't exist at all. And you found then you found this one example of like the old flamethrower and how it works. And it was ready just to project and shoot. You saw it happen. You'd be like, oh, there's no way the Byzantines could have done this. They never mentioned it. How'd they have flamethrowers or something like that? Like when it's missing all this other context and details, that'd be like, wow, unbelievable technology. There's no way they were advanced enough to do this on their own or at this time. But we know that they were, and we know kind of the mechanism by which it was kept a secret and how that secret was lost. That was a tech that we don't replicate or can't replicate easily that they had. And they found their own unique process to create it and did it independent of our process for making napalm or flamethrowers or something of that sort. So my point with all that is to say, the ancients are more than capable of developing crafty, ingenious solutions to problems, and some of those just won't survive in the historical record. That doesn't mean it's impossible that they could have built the pyramids or something else of that sort. It means they probably used a method or technique that is not immediately intuitive to us and hasn't survived the historical record. It doesn't make it impossible per se, prima facie. So when it's like, oh, what's so far beyond human accomplishment? I don't know if really anything is. I think it's impressive how ingenious our ancestors were in developing these techniques and solutions. It's not like history's not a civilization game where you unlock one thing on the tech tree and then it just leads to the next, and that original tech is preserved for all of history and it's the foundation that allows the rest of the progression to occur. It's far more just spontaneous, and sometimes something pops up and then fizzles out very quickly. It isn't retained in the civilization or passed on. You don't really see this cumulative technological process until the early modern West even, and that's now kind of changed our perspective on all of this. It's it's kind of it. That'd be my perspective, at least.
Otto said no way. Yeah, there it is.
Let's go, dude. I like it.
Thanks, Otto. Otto says no way. There's no way that we are the only life form.
No, we are the only life form, absolutely. I'm so insistent on this point. I don't think the actual physical size of the universe it means anything in this case. Listen, there's one thing for the universe to be big, and everybody poses it as this sort of probability game. It's like, oh, the universe is so big, and because we have life here, it's so large quantitatively that there must be life elsewhere. Everybody knows that Earth is unique in its sort of position in relation to the star. It's in the Goldilocks zone. It has the perfect conditions for life to be possible, for it to be habitable. I think that's not even the rare part. There probably are other planets like that, and that's where the quantity game really does kick in. You may have literal, maybe billions of planets in the exact same situation as Earth. I think what's less likely, it's for there to be true advanced biological life. It seems like the timeline for, first of all, a habitable planet to emerge, which is probably roughly about 4 billion years when the Earth emerged. Those were the conditions were right, just with stars anyways, to form rocky and then later habitable planets with a true atmosphere. From that to single cell organisms, to further evolutionary development, that takes also just billions of years, hundreds of millions of years, so much to arrive even just at where we are. I don't think there would be enough time in the universe, given the time scales involved here, to even have the conditions for biological life to evolve, for another biological entity to evolve at the same time and be more advanced than us too. It seems like there wouldn't be enough time for that to even occur at all. For them to be so advanced, they would have started around the same time, their planet at least 4 billion years ago, unless evolution can really just be so expeditious, far more than it was on Earth, which we don't seem to have any indication of based on how our genome works. I don't know how they could have evolved faster than us and also developed like faster than light travel or such unbelievable technological marvels to even arrive here. If there is any other alien life, it's probably very primitive and probably microbial or something like that.
Yeah, so that's fine, right?
Maybe, but I would even say it's probably not even the case there. We might even be the only one in that regard.
Because you're thinking of like 50s like comic book aliens.
Yeah. Which is what they say with who built our pyramids or something like that.
Right. But the idea of like bacterial, just like...
It's possible. I could maybe say that, but I don't even necessarily believe in that. I think it's not even the fact that our planet's in such a unique position. It's just that even life evolving at all is it is truly miraculous in that sense, and it has to occur over such a time scale. I don't think it's just happening all over the place or producing so much more advanced beings or more advanced entities who are capable of then faster than light traveling to go and visit us, or even have civilizations totally comparable to us. For me, it's the evolutionary aspect that makes aliens seem very unlikely. And I saw somebody, I think, say in the chat, like, we might be the first. Like, it's possible. We might literally, or Decria said it. Yeah, we might literally be the first biological life, really. That's, and it's possible. But I don't think there's aliens. I just don't. Just because the universe is big. Like, so what? It's all big. Our solar system's big. Like, I mean, the cosmic scale is massive. It doesn't mean that there's life everywhere just because it happened here.
Richard asks, how are the pyramids built?
I don't know. I bet they used some very impressive innovations for their day to get the right leverage and pull or whatever would be required. And whatever technique they used probably didn't survive in the historical record. And that's fine. There's a lot of stuff like that. But I don't know. I'm definitely not an expert. I don't think you needed some crazy like alien technology or even like super advanced human technology to do it. Probably get very clever with just basic physics and some pulleys in a way. That would be my guess. Any commentary on Nephilim, going back up to, I can't read your name, sorry from my angle here, but any commentary on Nephilim? Any
Lynchburg,
validity?
I'm Reaper.
Okay, Lynchburg, I'm Reaper. Any validity to claims about them and the lore spread on the internet? Yeah, there's a lot of different claims spread about them. I've seen it connected to like the alien stuff we were just talking about, and I don't know. I don't think there's any validity to it. I think the Nephilim concept is likely more symbolic than anything and not representing a sort of like hybrid race of angels and humans who were coming out and influencing ancient times, and they were menaces to human society, this weird coupling. I don't know. I think there's a symbolic element there that's more present as opposed to like real biological hybrids from aliens or actual fallen angels who copulated with human females and were giants connected to Atlantis. I've heard so many different claims in relation to the Nephilim. I see it more as a sort of particular symbolism. It can be interpreted in that context of a sort of a type of spiritual fall and the sort of what it could be called like almost a deviated warrior class here or there. And I think that's what it relates to more primarily. I think a lot of giant symbolism generally relates to that as opposed to just real beings or real demons, real aliens or something in that sense. Actually affecting physical life, you could say. But I don't know. I've seen so many different claims about them that I'd have to like dial in on a specific one or hear a specific one, but I'm not sure. Chance of thoughts on the fine-tuning argument. It's fine, but I don't know. It's never really been particularly convincing for me either. I know I was just describing a type of like fine-tuning or a physical arrangement of the universe in order to kind of discuss alien life, but I don't think perfect fine-tuning, or at least the way we assess it from our perspective, deductively proves the existence of God. It maybe is a strong inference, but the sort of true deduction, I'm not so sure about, or I'm less convinced by. I think a lot of our understanding, I'll put it this way. I don't like arguments for the metaphysical, for God, that are grounded in science primarily, or at least the present scientific understanding. The scientific understanding itself is so amenable to change and difference and modification and new interpretation that to sort of ground your view of God or the metaphysical or your apologetics in that, it's already putting it on shaky ground. I think you can probably make a better philosophical and metaphysical case for the existence of God independent of the particularities of our scientific understanding and interpretations. A lot of it's been popular in the apologetic space forever. It's like William Lane Craig's like Kalam cosmological argument, where he sort of relies on a lot of Big Bang related science in order to talk about the fact that the universe was caused and therefore, or rather that the universe began to exist and therefore must have a cause in this way. I don't know. I think it's a bad approach. It's just you're already relying on just this particular scientific interpretation that can easily be modified and undone. And you already see scientists doing this when they talk about the primeval atom and the Big Bang, and there's no real before time, or it can't even be a cause in the sense that causality would work in a temporal sequence, and so on and so forth. So not my approach. it could be a strong inference. It could be convincing to some people, but I don't think it deductively proves God just because it's based on that understanding.
You kind
Sort
of
shaky.
approached it in the last episode that we did.
I did, yeah. I did it in the religion episode. I have a more purely, almost like Platonic or purely metaphysical view of it, or approach to even trying to prove God's existence in some sense. So, yeah, it's not the fine-tuning cosmological approach. Not my favorite. Were the Gnostic writings left out of like the Bible in particular, like the scriptural canon? I'm going to assume that's what you mean, but they're left out because they can't be reconciled with the regular. Yes, okay, perfect. Yeah, they can't be reconciled with the actual sort of gospel or biblical narratives that were made part of the canon. The Gnostic writings really do stand on their own. They do comprise their own sort of unique interpretation of the Jesus event, you could say, and they're related to a real dualistic cosmology that just wasn't promoted by the early church as it was establishing that canon. So the Gnostic stuff is very interesting, but it was already operating as a distinct sect already in the early years, and that sect was already in opposition to what we now consider to be the mainline Orthodox Christian church in this sense. So yeah, they were already almost competing. You could even see this in the 1st and 2nd and 3rd centuries when the pagan Neoplatonists are addressing the Gnostics. They do treat the Gnostics and Christians, or mainline Christians, you could say, as real separate entities. They don't see them as like Christians of a single branch or a single church fighting it out or having a disagreement. They really see them as radically opposed. Like Plotinus, he was critical of regular mainline Christianity as well, but he had a particular issue with the Gnostics and gave them a separate treatment, especially insofar as he thought that they appropriated a type of Platonic metaphysical understanding that they got wrong. So I guess my answer is, why'd they leave it out? Because it was never really a part of it in the first place. The Gnostic kind of movement represented its own particular interpretation of Christianity that wasn't part of what we consider to be Christianity now in the first place. It was something radical and different, and they had their own canon because of that in some sense.
Let's ask, do you think there needs to be a better middle ground when it comes to discussing the founding fathers? Mm-hmm. Some folks mythologize them and don't think of them as people.
And then there's a 3, I think. Others sort of take a sadistic pleasure being like, gotcha, they actually weren't good. Yeah, there should definitely be a middle ground. And that's the sort of like nuance I try and promote here or try and discuss when it comes to history as well, because there is a tendency, no matter what, on both sides of that sort of approach that you just described. You treat the founding fathers as a sort of monolithic entity. It's even in the term that we use to describe them, the founding fathers, as if they were all they'd all totally agreed. They were operating on the same set of premises. They had the same set of expectations for what the country should be and what it should become. And then people say, oh, look, the founding fathers are all good. They're monolithically, this is what they wanted America to be. So if we deviate from that, it's a problem. And the other side, like you said, it says, look, the founding fathers did terrible things as these individuals. So we have to dismiss them. We have to move past what they said, and because they were evil in some sense. And it's like, no, they're not like just this monolithic entity. These were, again, real individuals who coalesced into a single movement of opposition against the British Crown and had radically different approaches for establishing self-government in the United States. This is competing interests, competing values, and it's actually impressive that we got a single government or a union at all out of that, to be honest. So it's only later this sort of like mythologizing where you have to call them the founding fathers as if they were all monolithically and singularly giving birth to their ideal nation, good or bad. And it's like, no, that's not really how it plays out. It is good to assess them individually and sort of give a fair treatment to the movement itself, and then appreciate how you sort of mythologize them or narrativize them later into an entity that is either good or bad. But yeah, that's how it goes.
Alathri says, why is there so much Masonic pagan symbolism in the early U.S. Capitol ceiling, for example?
It's just because they were Masons, pretty much. They were, I mean, this is what we were saying about Freemasons earlier. Like the Freemasons certainly were connected to the early push for liberalism and a kind of liberalizing tendency against monarchy itself. This is very current in the Enlightenment thinking of the age. I mean, they thought that they had uncovered a sort of natural process in society, the same way that Newton had uncovered a natural law that dictates the fundamental nature of the physical universe, of gravitation, and so on. These Enlightenment thinkers said, there's nothing really, divine in origin for society. It is a purely human sociological fact and phenomenon, but it's also governed by real structural laws. And if we give greater freedom, greater tolerance, we liberalize and move away from the monarchical system, we'll see a greater range of human flourishing. So they did believe in this very specific project, and a lot of that was tied into this Freemasonry. It's like this rediscovery of Hermetic, like Renaissance Hermetic writings, and against the institution of the Catholic Church. Like, this is how they interpreted it and narrativized it. So we're almost developing like a cult of reason and uncovering the real principles of society. And we're going to adopt the symbolism, the procedures, and that's it. So for them, yeah, it's part of their almost like it's part of their political project. I don't think there's necessarily like a deep worship there or a real like satanic influence or something of that sort. It seems to me very much wrapped up in that cultural current of the time. These just bizarre Enlightenment thinkers appropriating symbols from an ancient past to justify their current political project. Interestingly enough, you see that a lot in the later modern period. It's what the fascists do, for instance, when they're kind of establishing their movement. They're justifying it in certain terms, and they're appropriating symbols from the past outside of the very institutions that they think they're fighting against, the old order. So very similar tendency.
Tardis says, is there anything bro doesn't know dude's a straight wellspring of knowledge?
Dude, thank you. It's very kind. Thank you, dude. I appreciate it. Gotta be bevved up, as you said. When it comes to the actual Haitian Revolution, to me, not surprising given what the conditions were for the time. I mean, on Haiti, it was a brutal sugar plantation, just totally exploitative and, reliant on extensive slave labor. And the actual French colonial population was quite small there. They almost... they were very comfortable, almost predicated their security on the fact that the slaves couldn't rebel or would never have the gall to rebel against their order. They had them so thoroughly subjugated and dominated that it'd be impossible. So they lacked a sort of material strength that it is, necessary to safeguard their interests. So when the people did gain some sort of group consciousness and realized the conditions were furtive for a rebellion, it was very easy for them to take it over, more or less. What's surprising to me about it is that it didn't really inspire a similar sentiment in other colonies or other plantations across the colonial world. I mean, in the American South, for instance, they were very worried about it, and they thought that it would inspire a similar event or movement amongst their slaves, but nothing like that really materialized. It was very much contained to that island. And that makes me wonder if it was something, whatever current could inspire that revolution in the first place, whatever current sort of gave the slaves there a greater consciousness and a desire for independence and this sort of attempt to establish their own order. It was just very unique to the French circumstance. If it was really just downstream from the French Revolution itself and not something that just spread through the colonial world first and foremost. It was issuing from France uniquely top down into its particular colonies and not a unique colonial experience that could then be shared as a sentiment or a phenomenon across the board, because it never really materialized to anything else elsewhere, which is just interesting. You wouldn't expect that.
Justin's favorite.
Yeah, thoughts on Ted K's ideology? Listen, our other buddy Justin, who does a lot of the production, he's been a fan, you could say. But I think his critique of modernity is very interesting, especially the industrial technology. I think a lot of what he says is right about the Industrial Revolution. I don't know if the solution of becoming a true primitivist is the way, or if it's really possible in the face of industrial domination. But I do like the thinking because it does go against the grain that the industrial revolution is inherently good, and it's really what defines civilization as such. It's that conflation between the economy and the culture or the civilization, as we were talking about earlier. But again, his solution, living in the cabin in the woods, totally destroying the technology. I don't know if it's really possible, and we saw the path it took him down, and I don't think it's a good thing. Sending bombs in the mail doesn't seem like the best way to undermine the effects of the Industrial Revolution to me. And the fact that now it's just his movement, his ideology is just a sort of curiosity that's gained currency on the internet kind of says a lot. It kind of it illustrates the issue. You can't really get rid of it. And even an anti-industrial revolution ideal will have to utilize the very technology he hated to spread and gain popularity in the first place. We're kind of stuck with the conditions, and we have to meet them on their own terms if we want to oppose them and not just destroy them or reject them. It's going to be impossible to be truly reactionary and go back. Don't know if it's going to work. So, yeah, not my favorite in that way, but the critique is interesting.
Tarda says, do you see Washington's warning in his farewell address of the two-party system relevant today?
Yeah, it's definitely relevant in that way. It's the issue with all representative politics, in my opinion. There's always going to be, especially when it's divided up into factions, and whether those factions really manifest as two parties or multiple parties that really only typify two fundamental ideological currents, you're going to see this sort of discursive process. One side will present a measure that's in accordance to their ideology. The other will oppose it. And maybe if the system is functioning, it'll lead to a compromise of sorts. And that's precisely how the United States government was shaped up and how it came into being. But I think there's an issue with that. If there really is a truth, if there really is a right way to do things, if there is a correct position, any compromise will necessarily be a movement away from that truth. And maybe both sides were wrong. They weren't close to the truth either way. But let's say one side was, in some sense. If they're forced by the very structure and nature of the process itself to move towards compromise, to a modification of the truth in order to accommodate the false side, what you have is really the creation of a new falsehood. And then as that becomes that measure's passed, or that becomes part of the new system, it's the law, time goes on, and the politics and the society have all been shaped by that measure, you just get the same problem progressively. A new side proposes a measure or an idea that is closer to the truth or is the truth. It is the right way to do things in some sense, and they're met with the same opposition, and they're forced, if it's working, into a compromise. And that's another further movement away from that original truth. For me, it's something structural in the representative politics itself, and especially when they become mass movements, they have to appeal to the masses and kind of modify and calibrate their ideology in relation to the sensibilities of the general masses, and those sensibilities can be grounded in nothingness, really. There's nothing substantive really there. So what Washington warns about, the fact this two-party system can tear it apart, it is a real prescient issue with even the republic or democracy itself. You're going to see eventually a movement away from principle or truth, just from the fact that compromise is necessary for the system to even function. Let alone if it's just pure demagoguery, which it is now in many ways. There's nothing will get done. There is something empty there, and it's a real issue. So Washington himself, part of the reason he gives even the address, he was not very confident in the fledgling republic at all. He did not believe it was going to work. He thought in his own time it was already over and captured by ideologues. He was very much opposed to kind of the current and the early American politics of Jefferson and Patrick Henry and some of these other figures that featured prominently with the anti-federalists who kind of valorized and glorified the French Revolution. Washington and some others on the Federalist side, they were not necessarily anti-monarchy as an ideological point. They were opposed to the specific tyranny of the British monarchy as they experienced it. Whereas Jefferson and some of these others were truly ideological. Thomas Paine, Washington hated Thomas Paine, for instance, and the fact that Thomas Paine dedicated a pamphlet celebrating the French Revolution to Washington. Washington wrote in his private letters how he was appalled by this, but he couldn't disavow it because of the politics. So Washington himself didn't have a lot of hope for the Republic anyways. He thought it was already captured by those ideological interests and it was going to give way because the people and the ideology was contrary to civic duty or civic virtue that would be necessary for the Republic to function. So, yeah, it's relevant in a lot of ways, but it's also relevant for a particular reason because Washington himself didn't really believe in the possibility of this Republic. Two parties or not. So even if we had 3 or 4 or 8, it didn't matter. For him, there's a deeper structural issue.
Lynch says maybe some of y'all vids have covered this, but can you talk more about the Boxer Rebellion?
I've talked about it. We've talked about it a little bit here or there, but I'm not sure. It's an area I don't know a ton about, admittedly, only a little bit. Where it's interesting to me, here are the highlights. Like, it's interesting, because it's really very much in China a revolt against Western influence, of course. But it's interesting to me that revolt takes the form of sort of reasserting a traditional identity, going back to traditional Chinese practices like the Kung Fu or something like that, where they get the appellation like the Boxers, the Boxer Rebellion. To me, that's an interesting aspect of the identity formation, that they really saw their traditional culture as being diametrically opposed to the cultural and technological project of the West that they were bringing in. It's also, when it comes to the details of the event, it seems like I'm kind of blanking on them off the top of my head. But if I recall correctly, it did seem like that the Western powers that be, they did violate some of the agreements or some treaty that they had before. Relating to the embassy, if I recall, I'm going to forget all the details now, but it seemed like the Western governments were at fault of sorts. But it was also just then an opportunity for the Western powers to flex their military prowess, to utilize the new technology and subjugate what they saw as a rebellious natural subject that should have just been an economic siphon for them, and that's it. So it is interesting. There's a couple of points there, but admittedly, I don't know a ton about it. I have to really reread on it and study, but no, it's interesting. That identity formation aspect is cool to me. What do you think is the most misunderstood ideology in history? That's interesting. This is gonna sound like a trite answer, but I'm actually gonna say communism, because actual communism or Marxist philosophy is really intricate and complicated because it derives from Hegel, who is the most notoriously dense, mysterious, complicated philosopher in the Western canon, you could say. So Marxism as a kind of worldview, as an ideology, all of its economic thinking is predicated on some of the most difficult and mystifying philosophy that even Hegel's students didn't fully understand. And as that translates into a real economic movement, a social political revolution, real implementation of a government structure and an economic system, so much is lost in the translation, and so much of this dense material and theoretical speculation dies in the face of the practical realities. And there's a whole host of debates between how that translation should occur and when the timeline is and whether there really is a real dialectical process to this or not, and so on and so forth. My point with it is, it's interesting for a mass movement which relies on the liberation of workers to carry with it such an enormous philosophical baggage that only the brightest minds and scholars and intellectuals in Europe could even parse out in the first place. It's a really interesting kind of combination there. And I think that's why when it's actually implemented by these revolutionaries, it's always immediately deviated from the original position, or it's from the original position of Marx, that is. And it's always adopts its own kind of unique variety associated with the leader that's implementing it. And that's Leninism or Maoism or Stalinism and so on. There's just so many layers to it that are already dense and complex and furtive for real philosophical analysis. And then you go and try and tell a factory worker this is what you're fighting for, it doesn't translate very well. And in that sense, as you're critiquing it, as you're going against it, and Marx is just hard to read, the Communist Manifesto is easy. That's his popular pamphlet. But his actual ideas, he was a good philosopher, admittedly, and he was a good Hegelian. He's really hard to read, though. And you then try and, again, tell a factory worker that, or the illiterate peasants in Asia or in Russia. It just doesn't translate well.
I'm trying to think of something to relate it back to what we were saying about like Islam and just like how do you get this idea to like the low IQ layman
Sure, yeah.
and
How do you
just like
translate it? How do you implement
practice?
it? And they'd be like for the communist side, like that was some of the frustrations they expressed too, because they thought that they could condense the message into simple layman's terms that the workers would be motivated by, and they'd be able to organize themselves, and they would literally develop a class consciousness that would render them capable of assenting to this position and actually fighting for their interests. And the middle class, usually educated leaders of these revolutions and promoters of communist ideology, they always wrote about their extreme frustrations that the working class people that they were supposedly advocating for and pushing for their interests had no ability to understand the actual, meaning of communism or why it was necessary, the finer points of the doctrine. And they were perfectly capable with accepting their exploitation under capitalism. Their whole frustration was that they couldn't affect that translation. They said, okay, we'll leave you. Just listen to us, We're going to be the architects of the revolution, and we'll get you guns, but we're going to give the orders because we understand the doctrine.
Yeah, don't be so worried about it, brother. We got you. TARDIS, really quick, and then we'll do the,
Okay.
and then that'll be probably the last one. TARDIS says the Plato, beauty is a natural superiority.
Whoa, OG Black Pillar. Yes, he was. Because beauty is united. It's one of the transcendentals. It's the same thing, identical to the true and the good. So what is beautiful is also true and good. It's the highest form, you could say. And those three transcendentals are interchangeable. So if you're ugly, or ugliness itself is false and evil, false and evil, but beauty is good. And true beauty is the highest good and the highest truth.
Based.
Then,
Connor Meehan says, I've seen limited stuff of yours. What's your opinion on China versus America?
My opinion on it, just generally, and there's a lot of content. You could check it out, some of the streams, because we talk about it pretty extensively. In a nutshell, I don't want to have like China versus the US, really. I don't want us to be against them. I don't want them to be against us. I think there's potentially a reconciliation that's possible, which is better for all of our interests. The last thing I want is a true war with them. When it comes to a general comparison, I do think China is doing things well in a lot of respects, and we can learn from them. And trying to sort of situate them or position them as this natural or absolute enemy, I don't see the reason for it. I think it's going to lead to disastrous outcomes, and we should integrate some of their thinking into our system because for me, the U.S. in comparison seems moribund in a way. There's some issues we have here that we have to address, and China at least has some sort of civilizational or societal energy, and those are general abstract terms. I don't mean them as literal spirits or energy in the civilization itself, but there is a direction. There is some sort of vivifying aspect to their culture, to their system, and ours appears moribund by comparison. So I don't think we should be enemies, and we should perhaps learn from them, and maybe they can learn from us in certain respects too. There may be grounds for a furtive relationship and not just endless hostility that is disastrous for everybody.
It's undeniable. I think everything you see, and we're about to end, guys, but I think everything you see, like even our comments on Red Note, is just like all the Chinese people know that we're just taking the L, and they're like, they're aura maxing.
Yeah, they feel it.
They can feel it.
I think we feel it too in a lot of ways. So that's part of the issue. Yeah, China has long-term projects. America doesn't. That's true. Their system is capable of orienting towards those long-term projects and implementing them effectively. I don't even know with the current arrangement of our politics if we're even capable of orienting towards something long-term, let alone executing it effectively. Recent news that the Dalai Lama's on CIA payroll, China vindicating again. Yeah, I didn't see that news, and if that's true, it's so funny, and I wouldn't be surprised at all. It's, if he's really, the Dalai Lama is a subversive agent, then literally paid by the U.S. Intelligence apparatus, that's probably a problem. You don't want him just spreading his influence in your territory, just on a simple practical level. But yeah, he sold out for $180K. So cheap. Dude, I feel like a lot of people, it's surprising how low the price is for a lot of people to sell out. It's true.
The Dalai Lama 180K?
Yeah, 180K, dude. If that's true, I haven't seen the article, but that'd be very interesting.
Some dude at Facebook is killing him.
Yeah, dude. Like, seriously. Like 180K was the price to just sell out to a foreign state and be basically an asset. That's kind of brutal. So it's kind of blackpilling in that way.
Yeah.
Like,
Connor, shout out to you. Thank you so much for the follow.
Thank you, Connor. And then
the way you speak makes me want to gain more knowledge, not gonna lie.
Thank you, dude. I appreciate that. It's worth it. Knowing the world is always enjoyable. There is maybe it's what Plato was saying. Like there's you know the truth. If you really have something there, it is good. It is beautiful. Like it is worth engaging with the world in that way. We do live in a good time in that sense. We've talked a lot about technological innovation and maybe some of its issues, but the info is out there. It is available to us, like more than ever. If you are dedicated to looking and have a sort of concerted attitude about it, you really want to learn and you want to discern what's true from what's false. We have an abundance of information at our disposal, and sometimes it can be hard at first discerning what's true or false, but it's worth engaging in. I do it sometimes too, where I just shut my brain off and sleepwalk through life, but I try not to do it all the time. It's worth kind of pursuing these things deeper, just for its own sake. It may not even have a real material advantage, but it does do something for you. It is meaningful in that regard, for sure.